Everybody, Professor Snart here. Okay, so we move into Unit 8. We have just finished up our first kind of poetry unit, finding the poetry everywhere, and we have kind of that reply piece still hanging out there, but we move into our next unit, looking at sonnets. So we started our poetry section with a kind of unconventional look at poetry, not really from our textbook per se, but out there in the world at large, and hopefully people began to see that despite the fact that we think of poetry as this very, kind of marginal thing, and it just shows up in school textbooks and that sort of stuff, but it's actually like everywhere if we start to look for it. When we think about poetry as, generally speaking, language that is sort of arranged on a page or in space, it's not just like sentence after sentence after sentence. And it depends on this kind of like intensity of communication, not emotion necessarily, sometimes it is that, but just that sort of intensity of language arranged in space. Ha, that's good. I should write that down. If that's the definition of poetry, which, maybe it is, poetry is all around us. It's everywhere. And not to make too much of it, but it opens up a whole new way of thinking about like why the study of literature, like we're doing here, or poetry specifically, is maybe more valuable than just the academic exercise that it sometimes becomes. Okay, so we started with that sort of unconventional approach, and now we'll move to a very conventional or traditional form of poetry, the sonnet, although again we're going to take a maybe slightly different approach to it here. So you don't see sonnets published or used as a form that much nowadays. It's a great writing exercise or writing tool if you're interested in creative writing to practice certain literary techniques or elements. But I think the sonnet is also fun to study just because it has that tradition or history to it. And so by writing a sonnet, you're able to not just write your own, but participate in this long tradition of people writing sonnets. Whether they're old ones like the Shakespearean one that we've probably run into before, or more contemporary ones, which is also part of what we'll study for this unit. Okay, so we have a couple of readings here. These are all sonnets, although if you didn't know that, I think you'd be hard-pressed to maybe identify all of these as belonging to that same formal group. The one thing that they share in common, and I think this is true, is that they have 14 lines. But otherwise, other than them being kind of named sonnets by their authors, and now academically or scholarly, from a scholarly perspective, we know that they are, you'll notice that there's lots of variation from the Shakespearean one, right? The much more conversational sounding Wordsworthian one, so early 19th century British poet. Barrett Browning's famous How Do I Love Thee, a sonnet, most people don't even know that. A contemporary American poet, turn of the 20th century, Edna St. Vincent Millay, and then a sonnet by Billy Collins that kind of makes fun of sonnets. He's a very contemporary American poet. He was poet laureate very recently as well. Okay, so read through all of these, and they all contain 14 lines, but otherwise they don't necessarily follow a really obvious mechanical or formulaic structure, even though there are those rules in place for the sonnet, which is part of what we'll study here. You'll notice that the Shakespearean sonnet, or the Elizabethan sonnet, follows kind of the model that Shakespeare uses, or invented, popularized, whereas at least this one by Billy Collins, the sonnet, his sonnet, called sonnet, is actually a Petrarchan or Italian sonnet, which is the poet that he in fact mentions in his sonnet. So there are two basic types. Again, both 14 lines. A couple of the other rules differ a little bit. And the one that we'll focus on, or that I'll focus on here, is the Shakespearean one. That's kind of what we're going to go for. Okay, so the first assignment that you've got is really just to read through the sonnets. That doesn't take long because they're all just 14 lines long. And then choose one to record yourself reading. You can make it a video if you want, even if you're not on camera. You could do something interesting kind of visually for us. But really we just want to hear the sonnet, right? The kind of musicality or the rhythm of it, the way the language sounds when we bring it to life, not just when it sits there on the page for us. So this, I think, is just a kind of fun exercise in you know, breathing some life into these texts that otherwise just exist there in our textbook, closed and put away on the shelf, or for our purposes, you know, out in cyberspace somewhere. Okay, so discussion board, you're going to post whatever. If you do a video, you can YouTube link it. If you do just audio, you could use SoundCloud, which is kind of like the YouTube of audio. If you don't use it, it's a great little tool. Check it out. This is relatively easy to do these days, just with your usual smartphone, a website, and then you can plunk it into Blackboard so we can all have access to it. If you're one of those people, like most people, and you're like, I don't like the sound of my voice. Nobody likes the sound of their voice. Just get over it. Have some fun with it, right? Perform the sonnet a little bit. Have a good time with it. And then we'll do the reply part. Okay, there's a PowerPoint that you can access here, but it's basically just going to give you the rules of the sonnet. And truthfully, you could use Wikipedia or Google to find the exact same info in any number of different formats. Most of what you'll find here, or I guess the easiest part of the sonnet in terms of its formal requirements, which you'll see in the PowerPoint, is the rhyme structure, the number of lines, 14, that's easy enough. The way the quatrains, the lines of 4, and then the couplet that ends it are kind of organized, almost thematically, a little bit like an essay, sort of. Let's see, the rhyme, the 14 lines. There's probably some other stuff I'm forgetting. But the one that I'm going to talk about here is, for my money, both one of the most important in terms especially of like writing sonnets as a creative writing exercise, but also the hardest one for people to get is that iambic pentameter, or the rhythmic device that you'll see in most of these sonnets, especially the Shakespeare. The Malay one is the example that I'm going to actually use here specifically as one of the best. It can be a little bit harder to detect, especially like in the Wordsworthian one, where he kind of fudges the rules a little bit. But that, for my money, is one of the hardest things for people to kind of understand. So I'm going to try to walk us through a bit of it here. Part of the reason that I think it's tricky is that oftentimes people are taught to do like a syllable count, almost like you're writing a haiku. And if you get the right number of syllables, then you've automatically got the iambic pentameter, and it really doesn't work that way. So we want to be a lot more fluid and rhythmic with our use of iambic pentameter, rather than just counting syllables, and if we have the right number, we must have a nice rhythmic line, which is not the case. So it's all about how many beats per line that we got, and where the emphasis would fall if we spoke the line in a more or less natural voice. So I'm going to read through some lines here in a fairly unnatural way to like really highlight where the stresses would be falling, and how the rhythm kind of works. But when you do your reading up here, you really want it to sound more natural, right? So you're not giving a bad Shakespearean performance by stressing the particular areas of the words where we know that the rhythmic thing is supposed to fall. The rhythmic thing. That's good. That'll be on the test. Okay, so let's see. Oh, right. So, of course, the final assignment here is to write your own sonnet. Again, you can follow the rules as they're laid out in my PowerPoint, in examples you find on the web. It doesn't really matter, but it's the iambic pentameter that I'm going to walk us through here that I think is really the trickiest part. So I have a metronome tool that I'm going to use. And I have a couple of our sonnets here. The Shakespearean, Let Me Not to the Marriage of True Minds. Just a side note, if you ever see the square brackets, it means that Shakespeare himself didn't give this sonnet that title. It has just a number, but editors in textbooks or anthologies will then just borrow the first line and make that the title, but the square brackets indicate that it's not the author's choice, it's just an editorial choice. And then I'm going to use Edna St. Vincent Millay's, again, same thing, right? Those square brackets. Sonnet, What Lips My Lips Have Kissed and Where and Why. This particular line is, if I just had to choose one line that would be your model for iambic pentameter, it would be this one. So we'll see in just a sec. Okay, so remember, let's not count syllables, but what we're going to do is listen to the beat here, and I'll try to read with the beat, so it'll sound really unnatural, but if you read it more naturally, you'll see that the syllables or the emphasis still falls in a natural way, and we still have iambic pentameter. So iambic pentameter, the iamb is the metrical foot, or the unit of measurement that we use. An iamb is a da sound, so an unstressed and then a stressed, that's the one unit. And penta meaning 5, so we have 5 unstressed plus stressed across an entire line. Again, you can see it in the examples and hear it as I speak it here. What was I going to say? I can't remember. Okay, let's get to it. I'm going to start with this one, though, because it actually works a little bit better. Okay, so what we want is 5 of those beats in every line. Da 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 da, and 4 and 5. What lips my lips have kissed, and where and why, I have forgotten, and what arms have lain under my head till morning. But the rain is full of ghosts tonight that tap and sigh upon the glass and listen for reply. Da 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 da, and 3 and 4 and 5. Okay, I'll stop there. So, right. Hopefully you hear it 5 beats across the line, and that's where, again, some people are just taught count the syllables, and if you have either 5 or 10, depending on what you're taught, then you must have an iambic pentameter line, but it's really, that's too mechanical. We don't want it like that. And so I read it in a little more, or a much more mechanical way to show you how the beats would fall. But if we just read it, what lips my lips have kissed, and where and why, we still have those 5 beats occurring in a da 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 and 5 right line. So the iambic pentameter, the iamb, the da da, 5 times. Let's try it with Shakespeare. Shakespeare, being Shakespeare, would usually break the metrical rule in his very first line. So we wouldn't say, let me, not to the me, right? That's how we would do it per the rules. But notice that we actually start, but let me not, right? So the stress falls on that first one, but then he catches himself up. Let's try it. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover 4 and 5. Oh no, it is an ever-fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. See, you can make it really, like, annoying if you actually read it mechanically like that. But you'll notice that aside from that little hiccup at the start, it's mostly that pretty straight iambic pentameter. All right, if you're still confused or need more examples, watch this again because it's super interesting. Or just Google some other stuff. I'm sure you can find lots of explanations of iambic pentameter. But again, for my money, that's the hardest part of the rules of writing sonnets, because you can just see how the rhymes are supposed to work. We know how many lines they're supposed to be and all that kind of stuff. It's the rhythmic device that we want to get. And it's tricky, again, because we want to have it there, but in a way that we can still read the lines in a more or less natural voice without having to emphasize like the wrong syllable, the wrong syllable in a word to make the iambic pentameter work. So it's both a formal rhythmic device, but it produces natural speech. Kind of weird. Okay, so here we go with sonnets. Read a few, record yourself, video, audio, whatever you want to do, and post here, reading aloud. You want to bring these things to life, and then write your own. In fact, if you even wanted to record yourself reading your own, that would be cool as well. So 2 discussion boards, 2 separate assignments to have some fun with sonnets. As always, if you have questions, concerns, problems, whatever, be in touch with me, and I will talk with everybody soon.